Absolutely.
Thank you.
And Katrina is going to help me with the
Yeah.
slides. This is just, I mean, and don't be scared, it's a lot of slides, but it's not, I'm not going to talk into, the detail, rather give you an overview of where we stand right now in trying to map out where are the concrete entry points for IUCN in general as we go into the implementation phase of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. So next slide. So this is just again, a recap of what happened last December. This was the biggest CBD COP ever. And for some that have that are like delegates or often go to the UNFCCC, the number of 16,000 might seem like nothing, but for CBD it was a big gathering and a very important one. And there was, as mentioned there in the slide, because of the delay of the expectation was that this GBF was going to be adopted in 2020. Well, it ended up being adopted at the end of 2022. That delay created a lot of, I think, anxiety and a lot of push and pull across different delegations, parties that were negotiating this new set of targets. That is the big, like the big item in that COP was precisely the adoption of the now called Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And as you would have heard, it was adopted as part of a package deal with other 6 decisions that link to that global biodiversity framework regarding capacity building, resource mobilization, the monitoring framework, et cetera, But there were other 28 decisions that were adopted in this COP. And for many, that was it was deemed to be a make or break COP. Either we adopted that GBF then and there, or we were, some people even mention, what if, Montreal will turn into a Copenhagen moment for the UNFCCC in the 2009 COP, where, basically nothing was adopted and it was a big blow to the convention. Anyway, so that was the stake. And then we move, next slide, to what is like our assessment in IUCN. For many, I mean, what we got is not as ambitious as we would have liked. And perhaps there is a discussion to be held about, the targets that we would consider could be improved, let's say, in the implementation phase. But let's not, go into that. But for us, in general, it's an important step, and it's an important step in the right direction to address the biodiversity loss and the crisis that we're facing. We applaud that the commitment made in the 30 by 30 space, which was, I mean, one of the, if not the target that was, the most popular one, and that triggered a lot of attention because of the different, configurations around it. Also, the High Ambition Coalition, for instance, that has more than 117, I think it's countries that are adhering or pledging to, to the 30 by 30. So there was a lot of buzz around that 30 by 30, and we are happy with the result in that target 3. We are also pleased that the language in that particular target 3 recognizes indigenous and traditional territories, respects the rights of indigenous peoples, and this in accordance with the existing, frameworks, the UNDRIP in particular. So we also welcome those targets that are going towards the scaling up of conservation of species, targets 4, 5, 6. The preservation of remaining intact ecosystems and the large-scale restoration of what has already been depleted. That's target 2 mainly on restoration. And then we're very pleased as IUCN to have the language in targets 8 and 11 recognize nature-based solutions or include nature-based solutions. As you would have known, there were, during the negotiations period, there was a lot of pushback for the inclusion of explicitly including nature-based solutions as a language within those targets that were being negotiated. concerns that have come from different, quarters, the youth, some of the indigenous peoples groups vis-a-vis nature-based solutions, and the possibility of private sector to use nature-based solutions as a way of greenwashing. And it was a very, strong criticism that was out there. So we're pleased that this now is there. Like, now we have to see what comes next. And we also welcome, of course, the part that is on the financial side of things. So both on the reduction of harmful subsidies and on the increase of biodiversity finance to meet the needs of this very ambitious set of targets on the one hand side, even though the whole package, as I say, perhaps could have been more ambitious. Next slide. So it's done. COP is over. Now what? How do we get through? Actually, the finish line is not the finish line of the adoption, but the implementation side. And so from our side, we started this whole mapping exercise and reflection around how do we support implementation in the 7 years or so that we have left until 2030. And there are many ways in which IUCN can and should and will contribute to that implementation. And the first one that comes to mind is the implementation of our own program and the resolutions adopted by our members that link directly to the Global Biodiversity Framework. Then we see a lot of potential for us to engage in, of course, mobilizing the Secretariat, the commissions, the members, to, and I think it's very important, socialize what was adopted in Montreal, because it's not easy. I mean, I don't know how many pages long. It can be, you can be lost in translation really easily. So it's probably a good thing that we take on part of that awareness raising, communicating what was adopted. What does it mean in reality when we get into, this phase of implementation? That's one side. And then provision of data, building capacity, filling gaps where they are. We see a role for us also in terms of the low-hanging fruit, like we have what it takes to support implementation and accompany implementation on targets that are really close to IUCN's work. Target 1 on spatial planning, Target 2 on restoration, Target 3 on the 30 by 30, 4 on species, 8 and 11 that are NBS, and there are many others. So part of the exercise is identifying those entry points and where can we concretely support implementation. When it gets to the current monitoring framework, so the indicators framework, we see again another big space for IUCN to continue to provide, the information needed to beef up that monitoring framework. There are, and we're going to see it later on, there are some, indicators that are built completely or come from IUCN's data. So let's continue to do that. But there is also a role in terms of filling gaps in that indicator framework. We should also continue to enhance how the contributions for nature platform is developed, because this is a way by which IUCN members document their contributions in terms of actions and conservation and restoration actions. And how does that then links up with the global targets that were adopted under the GBF? I think it's important to continue to make that connection. And then the final one is to try and make much more operational the links between climate change and biodiversity. So for instance, this year, as we go into the COP28 of the UNFCCC, how do we make sure that by bringing, let's say, the language around nature-based solutions, we connect with the biodiversity agenda and the global biodiversity framework? Because these are not, siloed agendas. They are completely interconnected, yet they seem to have different negotiating spaces. So let's try and bring them together. Next slide. So the first, as I said, the first way of our contribution to to the Global Biodiversity Framework is through our program. It is the collective roadmap of the Union, how we set ourselves to do certain actions, concrete actions towards restoration, conservation, with a time frame of until 2030. So that links very well also with the time frame of the GBF, the time frame of the SDGs, and we have our 5 programmatic areas, and then the 5 transformative pathways that you have around the circle: recognize, retain, restore, resource, reconnect. Next slide. And this I'm not gonna go like in super detail now in the next slides, just simply to say there are many ways in which already our program connects with, the impact targets that are in our program and the actions that are foreseen for IUCN to go into are already like contributing to a number of targets in the GBF, in their intention, in their scope, etc. So you have some there listed: increasing recognition and enforcement of indigenous rights, on women's empowerment. So that connects to the gender equality target, for instance. Support the right holders and stakeholders, and how does that, can make, a very concrete contribution from IUCN to this program area, to specific targets under the GBF. Next slide. Same happens with land, so primary forest retention, documenting and protecting KBAs, soil biodiversity and productive land use of agricultural systems, and how does that connect to, say, target 10 on sustainable management in productive sectors. So it can be a bit, let's say, at this moment, very theoretical, because we're still, plotting things up and mapping and making the across the arrows. How does this link to this? But I think it's a start into, okay, so now what? Like, how do we concretely move forward in that direction so that we accompany that process, and specifically at regional and national level? How do we make sure that this what is needed gets down to the national level implementation of those targets that we adopted? Next slide. Same for water. You see the connection. There's always a long list of targets that to which we can actually contribute, or we're already contributing to what we set ourselves to do in this quadrennium and until 2030 as well. Next slide. Same for oceans. This is a big one because it also brings a lot of, climate, ocean-related health. It brings, the part about area management tools, NPAs, OECMs in the marine side of things. So the connections with some of the top-level targets of the GBF is quite evident. Next slide. And same for climate. You can see there are many ways in which we already are framed to contribute in any case to those targets. Next. And when it gets to resolutions and recommendations, and I would encourage you, if you haven't done so yet, this document that you have, like the little front cover there, is, and as you can see, it was prepared last year. We updated it for before the COP, so it was there was a release after the March one, but it compiles all the results from the Marseille Congress and how does that link to the GBF. So it was, of course, pre-GBF adoption, but already there you could see a big, overlap, or a big relationship between the program, as we just saw, the resolutions, 22 resolutions specifically link up to or directly to the GBF. again, this was before the adoption of the GBF, but it still gave us the, the marching orders, the mandate where we should be heading and putting our efforts. So there are things, there are resolutions that are going from very general, Resolution 116, that gives us the very broad mandate to support the development and the implementation of the framework. It explicitly says in supporting the implementation of the framework through the implementation of the IUCN program. But there are others, like, let's say, specifically targeting coral reefs, or specifically targeting oceans or protected areas, OECMs, the 30 by 30. So all those, what you see here is the distribution of those adopted resolutions against the targets. So how they link, because they, as I said, they give us a mandate, they provide concrete actions to be made. So here the message is we can and should be contributing also through the implementation of our own resolutions to that GBF. Next slide. So if we go more, let's say, zooming into different ways in which we contribute, one is, let's say, the target 2 on restoration. There are very concrete tools that exist already in IUCN. So the restoration opportunities assessment methodology, for instance, is readily available to be used at national level. It can contribute to the implementation of that target 2, a way of tracking how we're doing in terms of restoration commitments is this restoration tracker, the barometer. So those tools are there and available. Next slide. Another one that it's already ready to, let's say, to be used is the ecosystem typology, and there is guidelines or already available, a guide on using ecosystem risk assessment for restoration purposes. So the data that underlies actions to go into more strategic restoration and effective restoration action. Next slide. Then on the species side of things, I hope you've heard about the Global Species Action Plan. It's an action plan that IUCN, together with the secretariats of the various biodiversity-related conventions, our experts from SSC and other commissions have worked, over the last, I think, 2 or 3 years to support implementation of the upcoming, or then upcoming now, the GBF that has been adopted, by identifying a set of conservation actions that are required to achieve those species outcomes that are connected or are within that the GBFs and its targets. Also connects different actors, who has to do what, highlights the tools and resources that are available through that GSAP, or that Global Species Action Plan, and a program of work on species conservation can support how different, as I said, MEAs connect in terms of species conservation. So we work closely with CITES and CMS, for instance, to make sure that this GSAP also caters to their needs. It's not only a CBD prone action plan, or it's for all of those conventions as well. Can be used as a guidance for the NBSAP review that countries have to go into now that the GBF is adopted, and regional action plan as well. And there is the plan. I don't know how much is that already ready to be released, but there's a platform that will compile skills. It's called Species Conservation Knowledge, Information, Learning, Leverage, and Sharing, in a one-stop show where you can find lots of information about deployment of that Global Species Action Plan and supporting implementation of the targets in the GBF. Next slide. Then there are contributions that we made to many of those targets that I just mentioned, target 1, target 2, but also target 3 on the 30 by 30 through, let's say, the green list standard, so, or the KBA's standard. So this is just to say we already have a lot of data information tools that are ready to be used, deployed to support the implementation of the newly adopted targets. Next slide. And if I would, again, if you have questions about the details on the species side, on the restoration side, on the 30 by 30, do let me know and I can connect you with the people that are working day and night on these issues. Again, this is not only, and I like this slide because it's not only about what counts. So in the 30 by 30, what counts is also who counts. So which actors are involved and how do we involve those actors in the follow-up or the rolling out of those different targets. And there are many ways in which we are engaging actors in that respect. Next slide. There is a number of initiative projects that are ongoing that are already making, the adapting the course to be able to respond to the newly adopted targets. And so this is perhaps like one of the more, let's say, mature areas of work, I would say, because of first of all, the interest on protected areas, OECMs, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this has always been, a very close to the heart of IUCN and its members. This is an area of work that moves very fast. And because we now have that additional boost in the 30 by 30, this particular area has continued moving very, very fast into implementation of that target 3. So irrespective of the adoption of the target 3, I think that in any case, this would have moved further because there were commitments already made before the adoption of the target itself. As I said, through the High Ambition Coalition, for instance. Next slide. Another way in which we support implementation is, of course, through guidelines and training and capacity development. And this is done very closely with the Commission, the World Commission on Protected Areas, and how do we, unpack all those tools that we have, those guidelines that we have, and make them usable at the national level when we get into the implementation of this GBF. Next slide. So in terms of nature-based solutions, we now have them, as I said, in targets 8 and 11. Next slide. So how do we roll out nature-based solutions in practice? I think that we have to do much more of what we've been doing, socializing, communicating better through let's say, the global standard, the courses that are ongoing and that are being put together through the IUCN Academy, for instance. But there are many other ways in which we can communicate better NBS publications, specifically zooming into, let's say, cities, working with others, connecting to the agenda of the UNFCCC. It's also a way of bringing forward or implementing the targets that were adopted. So the ENACT partnership for NBS, for instance, that was launched in the framework of the UNFCCC, it's also a way of rolling the targets in the GBF and making much more concrete what is it that we want to get out of the deployment of nature-based solutions and do it well. So going back to our standard, making sure that all the ticks, the criteria are met, and continue this effort in terms of socialization and communication. Next slide, and I'm getting to the end. The contributions for nature platform, as I said, we should keep, and that's the plan in any case, enhancing how it works and making sure that it's used, that our members, do document their conservation restoration actions using the Contributions for Nature platform. It's a very powerful tool also to not only because it's it's spatially very appealing, but it also captures, it's a way of gathering information and capturing in different boxes and analyzing it. So it helps to give a picture of where we stand with conservation actions on the ground and with specific projects. The entries go into a filtering process. It's not that everyone can put whatever they want in there. So it's a very good tool, and it's a strong way of communicating how well we're doing in terms of advancing towards protection, conservation, and restoration of nature altogether. And next one, is contributions that we make, as I said, to the monitoring framework that are already there. So tools, IUCN data is already present in the ways of measuring goal A. So the red list of ecosystems is there. The red list index is as well there. To measure target 1, for instance, the headline indicator is the red list of ecosystems. The percent of land and sea covered by biodiversity inclusive spatial plants, for instance. How can we use the WDPA data to feed into that? Or the green list, how do we use the green list if we were seeing, say, target 3, for instance? Or an area under restoration, can we use the barometer? So some of our tools and data are already embedded or included in the suite of indicators under the monitoring framework, but others are not, and we could, offer those to support, beefing up or filling gaps in that indicator framework. And there are many other topics that IUCN could, contribute to. I just did a very, high level brush of those topics, but others could be, continuing on the gender mainstreaming side. We have worked closely with the Secretariat to enhance the rollout again of the gender plan of action when it gets to Indigenous peoples and local communities, making sure that when we go into, application and implementation of the targets that have to do with Indigenous peoples, and not only target 3, but others, we do, bring them on board. They are consulted, et cetera, et cetera. And so we, for instance, at the COP itself, we work very closely with our IPO members. The IIFB was, coming to our delegation meetings. We had, briefings with them. So how do we accompany, actors as important as our Indigenous peoples and local communities and our own members in this process of implementation? And the next slide, which is my last slide, is the actual question that you had from the beginning. What is the role of the national and regional committees in all of this? And I think that there are 2 main entries, and these are not, exclusive, but hearing what I just said and what's the state of play, I think that the first role that I see is precisely as a convener at the regional and national level. And that to do several things. One is increasing awareness, as I said, trying to translate that global biodiversity framework into the relevant regional and national contexts, which is a must, and it has to happen in any case in the exercise of the BSAP revision, for instance. That has to happen, but it needs accompanying because it's not an easy task to do. And I think IUCN and its members at the regional and national level has the assets to precisely do that, to help translate, to help inform what was adopted in Montreal and the ways in which those targets and goals can be applied and implemented. Then another part of the story is to gather information at the regional and national level about what is it that actually countries need in this phase of the process. So as they move into all the, what does this mean for my country, this global framework, what are the exact needs that are coming from the national level? Because a lot of assumptions are made at the global level, for instance, with the long-term capacity development strategy that was also adopted in Montreal. But obviously, it's at the global level, you can only have so much of a feeling of what are the actual needs at the national level. And that information sometimes gets lost in the final negotiation and the decision at the global level. How do we make sure that those needs that are real and are there get captured in a way that then translate into effective action? And I think there's a role there as a clearinghouse mechanism of some sort for regional and national committees. And then as catalyzers of concrete action. So, okay, we identify what does this mean? We identify the exact needs, but what do we do about that? And how do we actually go into implementation? And that's where I see, the matchmaking exercise, or as a way of not only, catalyzing, boosting concrete action, but also making sure that the connections are made. Who can support who at the national level? And so, I don't know, I leave my reflection there for you. And if you have more, please add up.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I'm going to just ask a technical question of DJ, first of all. I wonder, when we have the recording of this, if it's possible to edit it to just have Sonia's presentation, which was so comprehensive and so easy to understand, that we can then share it with national and regional committees, just this one presentation as a synopsis of what we've all been thinking and concerned about. How on earth do we go about this? Because you have captured so many answers in there to so many questions that we're having at national and regional level. I had a national committee meeting this morning, first 2 hours of this morning, where we're dealing with all sorts of questions, and across our country and across other countries, people are saying, well, what are we going to interpret an OECM as? Or how are we going to define degraded land in Target 2? And everyone's going to be making up their own interpretations. And I think one of the most valuable things that national committees and regional committees can do is to transfer these clear standards and definitions before people get all embroiled in conversations about it. Actually, here is the definition, here is the standard. Now use that as your first step. And if you want to do something different to that, well, be careful, because this is the way that it starts the process off. And lots of conversations around Target 2, and all of a sudden here we have a restoration barometer, which I didn't know about, and which I can't wait to get stuck into and to share with others. So really super presentation, and lots of things to consider here. And I think probably what we've highlighted here is how much is going on, at the senior IUCN level, shall we say, and what it takes for it to trickle down to implementation at the national and member level. And we talked a little bit about communication earlier on. So maybe there are so many things in there that we would like to be using, and to make sure all of our constituent parts know about. Really, really good. Thank you so much for that.